Thank you all so much for joining us for an introduction to bird watching. And today's program is led by the great Scott Santino, the education manager and teacher naturalist at the Ipswich River Wildlife Sanctuary in Topsfield, where he has been leading nature education programs for the Mass Audubon since 1999. And I again want to thank the Friends of the Library for sponsoring. To all of us who are watching live and the many more that will watch the recording, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Scott for joining us here today. And Scott, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you very much, Robert. And welcome, everyone. It's always a pleasure to be able to spend some time with the folks who tune in for Tewkesbury Library. As Robert mentioned, we're going to dive into a bit of an introduction to birds and bird watching. Obviously, you have an interest in birds or you wouldn't already be here. And so my hope is to spend a little bit of time and share a little bit of information that will help enrich your already established interest in birds and bird watching. I feel that people who enjoy birds, from a very beginner to a lifelong expert, are all and everywhere in between, are all along a spectrum. And at every level, at every stage, birds are a great group of organisms to enjoy and to learn about. And, whether you're consider yourself a birder or a bird watcher, I see them as being synonymous. If you enjoy watching wild birds, you can call yourself a birder or a bird watcher or a bird enthusiast, whatever works for you. Here's what we're going to discuss today. I always like to talk a little bit about why people enjoy bird watching. People who enjoy this activity aren't drawn to it for the same reasons. And so I'm going to share some of the reasons that I've come across over the years, and perhaps you'll be able to identify with some of those reasons. We'll take a jump into the time machine and go back and talk a little bit about the beginnings of bird watching here in North America. There's a long storied history of bird watching here in the United States, and we'll dive into that a bit. Then we'll get into taxonomy. And I think taxonomy is an important topic for us to spend some time in, because if you do want to learn more about birds and you want to use tools like field guides or eBird or apps, understanding some of the basic taxonomy of birds is going to be very helpful for you. Then we'll talk about basic anatomy. I like to refer to those as characteristics or field marks. When you see a bird, how do you process it in helping to figure out an identification? And then finally, we'll end with some tools of the trade and ways in which we can all help bird populations. This here is a bird called the northern flicker. And I say, and so it begins, because this was the bird that started bird watching for me. This is what I would call my spark bird. A spark bird is a bird that prompts someone to want to learn more about birds. And I remember it vividly. I was about 20 years old. I was looking out the picture window of the house I grew up in down in Carver, Massachusetts. And there were all these things all over the lawn, these robins that kind of just blend in the background. And there was one bird on the lawn with the robins that was so much different. It had yellows and reds and speckles. It was the very first time I remember making an attempt at wanting to learn more about birds. It made me curious. So perhaps you have a spark bird. And if you do have a spark bird, I invite you to put that into the chat. What bird kind of pulled you into this wonderful world? You're not alone, because it is estimated that over 45 million people in the United States enjoy bird watching based on a 2016 census. And believe it or not, the US economy annual spending for birds and bird watching is approximately $80 billion. This includes feeding birds, attending programs like this, traveling, buying optics, photography. It is big business, and there are a lot of people who are enjoying it. So you're not alone. Well, why do people come to bird watching? Well, one of the reasons I've found is that these organisms are exquisite. They're beautiful, beautiful creatures. Take a look at this green heron and all of the detail and color in its plumage. Bird watching for a lot of people is a gateway for them to peel themselves away from the hustle and bustle of their day-to-day lives and feel like they're part of the natural world. We know that for our own sanity and our own positive mental health, connecting with nature can be really beneficial, and birds are a gateway to do that through their beauty. Mystery is another thing that brings people to bird watching. What's making that noise at night? Or what pooped all over my car? These questions lead people to wanting to learn more and to solve some of these mysteries that involve these wonderful feathered creatures. Birds as a group are extremely social. And because they're social, they vocalize a lot. This little Carolina wren is a bird that I've had a lot of people ask me questions about over the years because you hear them way more often than you see them. And this is what their song sounds like. They're loud, and they have a wide range of vocalization. One of the mnemonics I like to use for this bird is tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle. Maybe you can hear that in its song too. Another reason why people enjoy bird watching or combined two loves is travel. You can go all around your town, all around your state, all around your country, all around the world to watch birds. This is a picture I took back in 2018 where I was leading a Mass Audubon trip to the Galapagos Islands, where there's lots of endemic species, endemic meaning birds that you can't find anywhere else in the world. And so to be able to combine traveling with bird watching is a fantastic way to get into this activity. I also find that bird watching creates a sense of camaraderie with other bird watchers. If you're ever out in the field and you see someone with binoculars or a field scope, I invite you to say to them, "Hi, how you doing today? What are you seeing today?" Bird watchers in general are friendly and they enjoy sharing what it is they've encountered. And so in this particular picture, this was taken down in Cape Coral, Florida. And my friend Bill here happened to have a Florida scrub jay land on his hand, which was an amazing sight to see. Birds are accessible. You can find them anywhere, whether you're in your yard, whether you're at the grocery store, supermarket, or whether you're on a big, beautiful wildlife sanctuary or refuge. Birds can be found no matter in most places that you go. And so perhaps you too like to, take a moment wherever you are and look and listen and see what kind of feathered friends are out and about. Bird watching has been happening here in North America well before we have records. Of course, indigenous people knew what organisms lived in their environment quite intimately. And there are a lot of names of birds that we don't use anymore that the native people would have called these beautiful, interesting creatures. For the sake of our presentation and story, we're going to start when Europeans came into the New World and, quote, discovered these new species. And one of the first people who did this was a gentleman named Alexander Wilson. He was the first ornithologist that came to the New World from Europe and created the first field guide called American Ornithology. And he worked on this book from 1808 to 1814. It cataloged 268 species, 26 at which point had not been previously described and known in Europe. So Wilson was someone who really inspired lots of others, primarily again from Europe, to come to the New World to be explorers and pioneers. And if you're thinking, well, that name sounds familiar, Wilson, it is, because there are a number of bird species that you would find in your field guide that have his name. Wilson's phalarope, Wilson's plover, Wilson's snipe, Wilson's storm petrel, and maybe you're even seeing right now in May, Wilson's warblers. Wilson gave way to probably the most well-known name in North America bird watching, and that, of course, is John James Audubon. He worked on arguably the most comprehensive and most artistic field guide ever done in North American bird history. He created the Birds of America, which categorized 497 species, and he worked on this from 1827 to 1838. What Audubon did, which other ornithologists hadn't done, was he would depict or put these birds into certain features or displays or positions that were more lifelike before painting them. These gentlemen were, of course, in North America looking for birds before optics existed. They were not running around with field scopes and binoculars and cameras. What they needed to do was they needed to shoot these animals in order to get them in hand and be able to then form them into certain positions and put them into their habitats in which they were found. And Audubon did this beautifully. At about 1870, there was this thing happening in North America called the millinery trade, in which birds were being shot for fashion. Not only were they being shot for science and cataloging, but women were wearing them on their heads. And this took people aback who thought that, the slaughter of these birds for fashion was horrific. It was established by 1886 that 5 million birds were being killed annually here in the United States for women's fashion. And this is Mass Audubon's founding mothers come in. In 1896, two Bostonian socialites, Harriet Hemingway, who's pictured here, and her cousin Mina Hall, started holding tea parties for wealthy women in Boston. And in these tea parties, Hemingway and Hall talked with these other women and their husbands about stopping this senseless murdering of birds for fashion. These tea parties established the very first Audubon Society in North America, the Massachusetts Audubon Society. And additionally, this grassroots effort done by these two women also prompted the 1918 Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which gave the first federal protections to birds in the United States. It was such an important piece in bird watching history that these women took notice and put a stop to the killing of birds for fashion. That gave way to kind of the next round of ornithologists. Florence Merriman Bailey, Ludlow Griscom, and Roger Torrey Peterson. These are names you may or may not be familiar with, but these early 20th century ornithologists were the first to start looking at birds through optics. They were the first to start drawing and painting birds. They were the first to say you don't need to shoot a bird and get it in hand in order to be able to identify it. And it was because of the efforts of these people and others that bird watching today is kind of done in the same light, where you use your optics, you use your camera, you use your two eyes, and you look at these things we call field marks and helping us to identify birds. And so that takes us to today. Today, bird taxonomy is in flux. And what I mean by that is every year, the American Ornithological Society does a review of where they think birds are in taxonomic order, from the most primitive, most dinosaur-like, to the most modern. And then they're arranged based on that. So for example, if you looked in a field guide for North American species, you would find that ducks or waterfowl are the first birds in the beginning of the book, swans, geese, ducks. And then at the end of the book, you would have our songbirds or passiforms. You'd have things like northern cardinal at the end and all these other birds in between. So we're going to take a little time here to talk about taxonomy to help you be able to better understand and use these tools as a bird watcher. So here's a bird. It's on the side of a tree trunk. We're curious. There's a bird, so what now? How to identify it? Well, it can be pretty daunting. It's estimated that there are over 10,000 species worldwide. Currently, over 2,000 can be found in continental North America, from Mexico up into Canada and Greenland and so forth. Here in Massachusetts, there have been approximately 500 birds observed in our state. So when you put that into context and you take 10,000 species and whittle it down to 500 that have been found in Massachusetts, you've reduced a huge number of possibilities. And what we'll do is we'll talk about how to whittle those possibilities down even smaller. It's important to know what are some of the characteristics, kind of what makes a bird, right? And of course, the most obvious thing is one that covers their bodies. If you find an organism and it is covered with these things called feathers, you know you have found a bird. Birds tend to have wings. Now, not all birds take flight in the same way. Most of our birds can fly in the sky. Some birds fly in water, like our penguins, but can't fly in the sky. And then other birds just don't fly at all, like an ostrich. And so there are a number of birds that use their feathers in a number of different ways. It could be for flight. It could be for communication. It could be for thermoregulation. It could be for protection from the sun. It's all of those important factors. Birds that do fly have an impressive skeleton. They have adaptations that allow them to be able to take to flight. Many of them are migratory, and that's why May is such a great time of year, because many of migratory species that winter down in Central and South America are coming through the Northeast right now. As I mentioned before, they're warm-blooded. As you all know, they lay eggs. And in order to process food, they have this tool that we call a beak or bill. There are so many types of birds. Here is a smattering. And what I want you to do for a moment is look at these 4 birds, and you don't have to tell me what species they are. But what I'd like you to do, either out loud on a notebook page or in the chat, what 4 groups or categories would you put these birds into? Again, I'm not looking for a species name, but just based on their bill shape, based on their characteristics, based on where they are in their picture, the type of habitat. What category would you put these birds into? So I'll give you a moment to think about that. I see that some prompts are coming in the chat here. And we'll go around them from 12 o'clock around to 9 o'clock. So at the very top, we have a bird that has gray and white plumage, black wingtips, and a long bill that curves at the end. It's on the water's edge. We might call this a gull. And so if you know what a gull looks like, you can go to a bird guide and sort through the gulls to figure out the species. This particular gull, I like to refer to as the McDonald's parking lot gull. It's a ring-billed gull. As we go down to 3 o'clock, we have a bird that has a curved beak that's down on the ground. And even though you can't see him, it has sharp toes that we call talons. This, of course, is a hawk. And if you know any of your hawks, you may notice that this hawk has a red tail. And so this is our red-tailed hawk. The bird at 6 o'clock is floating in water. It has a long, flat bill used for seining or pulling vegetative material out of the water. And it has feathers that repel water while it swims in the water. This, of course, is a duck. And this handsome duck with the yellow bill and green head is a mallard. And then as we make our way to 9 o'clock, we have one of our songbirds. Most of the birds that we have in the world fall into this group that we call Passeriformes. It's an order. These are our songbirds. So you may call this bird at 9 o'clock a songbird. You would be right. You might call it a thrush. You would be right. And you might call it an American robin. And you would be right as well. So as you can see, birds can be categorized at different levels. So let's talk about this bird for a moment. This might be one that you already know. And what I like to do is I like to use tools to help me remember information. I call those mnemonic devices. And you might have a mnemonic device that you used for back in high school or college biology. The mnemonic device I used to like to use was King Philip crossed over 4 great spaghetti. What that helped me remember is that this organism here in front of us falls into each of these categories: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. So again, for this animal, it would fall into each of these categories. It is an animal. It's in the kingdom Animalia. It is in the phylum Chordata. In other words, it has a backbone. There's a subphylum called Vertebrata that these animals belong to. The class is Aves. That's where we get into birds. All of these feathered creatures are in the class Aves. The order that this particular bird is in, we call Columbiiformes. These are our pigeons and doves. And then they're in a family that we call Columbidae. And then once we get even further in, we can give it its binomial nomenclature. Binomial nomenclature is something that was established by Carl Linnaeus, a Swedish botanist, that said no matter where you are in the world, each living thing that has been identified has a first and last name that is of Latin origin. And so this particular bird, we might call a mourning dove, we might call it a rain dove or a turtle dove or coo dove. But no matter where you are in the world, the Zendania macora is not going to change. That is its scientific name. So all of these pieces help us to be able to better identify birds through the use of tools that are arranged in taxonomic order. So here's that bird again that we saw earlier on the tree trunk. I wonder what it is. Well, it doesn't look like a duck, and it doesn't look like a gull, and it doesn't look like a hawk. Well, it must be some kind of songbird. So let's go to our Sibley guide here, and we can start at the beginning, and we just match it up. Yep, these pictures look nothing like the bird hanging off the side of the tree trunk. And so we start flipping through the guide, and you may get back to some animals that look somewhat similar to it. This bird looks a bit like a chickadee or a titmouse, if you're familiar with them. And so now we have the right category, right? We're in the right family. That's great. And then you might find a picture. Not only does it look like the bird, but even in the drawing, it depicts the same habit. Oh my goodness, we've discovered our bird. It's in the back of the book with the rest of the songbirds. And this is what we call a white-breasted nuthatch. And that's why I like to connect it to being able to efficiently identify birds in the field through the use of field guides and apps is somewhat important to understand the systematics or taxonomy of these birds and how we think that they've evolved. So let's do a little exercise here. We're going to make an observation. What I want you to do is this next picture that I'm going to show you, I want you to just drink it in. All right? We'll give you a minute. Pretend that you are standing in real life looking at this scene. You can hear the water and the waves in the background. You can feel the warm spring breeze on your back. What's happening in this picture? All right. So here's what I want you to do next, because this is important stuff if you want to be able to identify birds in the field. My first question for you is, how many birds did you see? Okay. The next question, what, quote, group of birds did these belong to? Or did they belong to the same group? And then of those birds, how many different species do you think there were? And maybe you weren't sure. We can look at the picture again, and we will. And then the fourth habitat is, what type of habitat were the birds in? I like to teach bird watching is a lot like real estate. What is the most important word in real estate? Location, location, and location, right? And that proves true for naturalists when they're in the field identifying birds or mammals or plants, etc. So here we are. Let's look at these birds again. How many birds did you see? The answer is 3. What group of birds do they belong to? Well, we already talked about this a little bit. These are gulls. Are these gulls all the same species? If you take a look at them, they all look like they have different plumages and different sizes, different colored beaks, different colored legs, right? These are the 3 most common gulls that we get in New England. The one on the left, the big one, is called the great black-backed gull, and this is a young bird. The one in the middle, we already saw before. This is that McDonald's parking lot gull. That's the ring-billed gull. And the gull on the right is probably the most common gull that you'll come across here in the Northeast. This is called the herring gull. And where are you likely to see all of these birds hanging out together in the same place? It would be in a marine environment. So for location or habitat, you could have said beach or ocean or marine or salt marsh or something like that. And all of those would have been an accurate depiction of the habitat. So that's a little bit of an overview. And if we were to do a bird walk together in person, we would look out into the environment, and these are some of the questions that we would ask to help us on identification. So let's talk a little bit more about the anatomy or how to identify birds. Learning basic terminology is really essential for helping you navigate through certain field guides and also understanding where to look and what other factors to understand when looking to identify birds. So a couple of things that you can ask yourself include, what size or shape is the bird? Depending upon the sunlight that the bird is in, color may not be very effective. So knowing the size and the shape is going to be important. If you do have the bird in good light, then you can look at the colors and you can look at the patterns and you can see if it has wing bars, or you can see if it has a dark back or a light belly or undertail coverts, things like that. Another thing is behavior. There are a number of birds that do unique things behaviorally that can help us with identification. There's that habitat word again. Remember, location, location, location. You're probably not going to find a great blue heron walking under oaks and pine trees in a forest hunting. You're more likely to find it on the edge of a river. Vocalizations. This time of year is amazing to hear all the bird songs that are happening outside. And you can learn bird language. And if you learn bird songs and bird calls, you don't even need eyes to be able to identify birds. There are people I know who are blind and amazing bird watchers because they're bird listeners. Then you look at the field marks. You can look at range maps, right? If you see a bird and you go, I wonder if that's a Steller's jay. And then you look in the map and you go, well, Steller's jays live in California and I'm in Massachusetts. Looking at the range maps can be helpful. One of the sayings I like to use is, if you hear footsteps, think horses, not zebra. What's the most likely candidate going to be? And then showing patience, because again, we're all along this spectrum, and showing humility. There's not one bird watcher that you're going to meet on planet Earth who hasn't misidentified birds. And that's part of the learning process. Some of ornithologists' most valuable lessons are the fails, and it's taking that information and applying it forward. And this particular bird is wonderfully cryptic. It hides in marshes, and it sounds like this. This being a really cool bird called the American bittern. So back to that size thing. Let's practice a little something here. We have 3 birds here, right? These are birds that I find that even if you're not an expert birder, you probably are aware of or know of the black-capped chickadee, the American robin, and the American crow. These birds are common, and they are of varying size. As you can see here, a chickadee is no more than 5 or so inches in length. The American robin is about 10, and then the American crow is about 17 and a half, right? So if you see a bird and you don't know what it is, one of the things you can do is you can say to yourself, is this bird I'm looking at chickadee size? Is it robin size? Or is it crow sized? Size is going to be an important factor in helping you to identify it, along with all of those other pieces, time of year and habitat, habitat, because that's most important. You want to say it more than once. So here's another bird that we are seeing on the edge of a field on a May day. And what we're going to start to do is we're going to start to process the characteristics of this bird, or they might commonly be referred to as field marks, the terms. And there's a number of terms that ornithologists use that you probably are already familiar with. And so here are some. The forehead. Yep, we have one. That's pretty straight. Okay, chin. Yep, check. Throat. Huh. These are the same names that maybe the parts of your pet dog or cat have. Okay, easy. The breast. Yep, I've heard of that before. Belly. It's below the breast. Okay, excellent. And tail. Look at that. So here is a half dozen field mark terms that you already know. Perfect. We're off and running. Here are some other terms that are maybe a little more advanced. Maybe you haven't heard of these before, but they're very common when processing or identifying birds. We call the top of the head the cap or crown. The back of the neck of the bird we would call the nape. The shoulders are called the scapulars. The center of the back of the bird we call the mantle. The area of the bird's cheek we would call the auricular. When we look at the flight feathers, the outermost feathers on the wing we call the primaries. And then there's another set of feathers on the wing that are closer to the body that we call secondaries. And then there are these feathers that we call tertials that are even further in on the wing. The flank is the area that is above the belly but below the wing. Here are some other terms that you might be familiar with as we look at a different species. The top of the tail we call the rump. And the feathers that overlay the rump with the tail we call upper tail coverts. And then, of course, we already talked about this one. We have the tail. We also have this thing that birds use to process food, the bill or beak. And both of those terms are accepted. You can call it a bill or you can call it a beak. But there are two parts of it. And so we might call the upper part the upper mandible, and we might call this the lower mandible. All right? So here's our next little activity, should you choose to do it. These are 3 species that you can find in Massachusetts this time of year. They all breed in Massachusetts. They all have widely different shaped bills. What I want you to do is look at these bills and think about what they like to eat, okay? And then I want you to associate it with a tool that you have in your kitchen. If I told you that you were going to act out the feeding or demonstrate the feeding styles of each of these 3 birds, and you need to do that by going into your kitchen and grabbing some utensils, what utensil would you grab for each of these 3 birds? Go ahead and think about that for a moment. And then I'll share some of the utensils that I've decided I would use and take out of my kitchen. So the first bird, of course, is a ruby-throated hummingbird. These beautiful little migratory birds are back in Massachusetts. I saw my first one the last week of April at my hummingbird feeder. So they've been around a while. It's even possible that females are building nests right now. These birds are nectivores. They feed on flowers, but they also eat a lot of bugs. They will eat a lot of small insects and arachnids. So the tool that I might grab is a straw, because they use that long bill to help pull up nectar and other sources of liquidy fluid from flowers. The middle bird here you might be familiar with is a northern cardinal. Cardinals often come to our feeding stations, especially if we have a variety of seeds, and they have a big cone-shaped thick bill that is perfect for breaking apart seeds. And so if I were the cardinal, I might grab a nutcracker or some pliers that I would use to crack that nut open and to be able to get the kernel inside. And then finally on the right, we have our mallard again, a duck. Ducks eat mostly aquatic vegetation if you're a dabbler. This is not a duck that dives deep underwater looking for things like fish or crustaceans or mollusks. This is a bird that kind of dabbles at the top, maybe puts its head underwater. And so if I were to use this, I might grab a slotted spoon or something like that that I could use to take up the plant and vegetation with my bill. And so it's really helpful when you look at a bird to spend time looking at the bill. The bill is their business. Without the bill, they're not processing food. Without food, they're not gaining calories. And without calories, they're not being able to live out all of their daily routine, right? Which is finding more food, finding mates, laying eggs, feeding young, repeat. And some of them migrate and some of them don't. There's also another end of the bird that's worth noting, which is the legs. And so there's the tibia. And for those of you that are familiar with mammalian anatomy, that means when we see the bend in a bird's leg, we're looking at its ankle. We don't usually see the knee. The knee is up in the belly area, covered by plumage. And so that bend back that we see is the ankle. And so there's the tibia, and there's the tarsus. And when birds walk or stand, they're literally standing on their toes. They're their toes. And again, depending upon the species, we might call them talons, right? And there's various arrangements of toes depending upon the bird. Well, let's take one more slide here, and we'll get a little bit more into what I like to call advanced field marks, okay? So here we have two species that I affectionately like to refer to as LBJs, little brown jobs. These are sparrows. We have a variety of sparrows that you can find here in Massachusetts in a calendar year, and they're all relatively small, they're all relatively brown, and they can be tough to identify. So as we look at these two birds that look very similar, one of these birds you would expect to find in Massachusetts from April to November. The other bird is kind of what I like to refer to as a wow bird. And I call it a wow bird because it is not a bird that you regularly find in Massachusetts. They're here annually. We should be looking for them, but they're not regular to our area. And so what are we going to look at? Because they look very similar. One of the best field marks to look for in these species is an area that we call the lores. The lore is the area in front of the eye, but behind the bill. And one of these birds, the bird on the right, you'll notice that this thing we call an eye line, that black line, goes all the way through the eye and into the lore behind the bill. But the bird on the left here, you'll notice that the eye line stops behind the eye and the lore is clear. So these are sometimes the little details a bird watcher needs to focus in on, and that's why I call it advanced, to tell the difference between the chipping sparrow on the right and the clay-colored sparrow on the left. Another tip that I'll give right here that you can choose to use or not is that when you have a bird in front of you, watch it for as long as the bird will sit there for you. I've met a lot of folks, and I've been guilty of this myself. You see a bird and you go, oh my goodness, I don't know what that is. Let me open up my application on my phone, or let me go to my bird guide. And now I'm flipping through the bird guide and I look back out the window, I'll look back up at the bird, and guess what? It's gone. Observe that bird for as long as it will allow you to observe it, and make mental notes or even sketch what it is that you're seeing before that bird flies away and you go to your field guide. What are some of the tools of the trade? Well, I would say all of you have the first tool, and I call that tool interest. The very first thing is having an interest and a desire and wanting to learn more about birds. But there are a variety of different things that you can purchase or borrow or use, or maybe you have already in your house, that will help enhance your experience as a bird watcher. Most notably, of course, are optics. And there are a wide range of optics that you can use. I will share that in kind of the broadest sense. When it comes to optics, you do get what you pay for. And so there is a wide range of expenses when it comes to optics. And if you do invest and a pair of optics, anywhere from about $500 north, you're buying a pair of binoculars that will probably last you the rest of your life as long as you don't lose them. There are two different forms. We call the one form that's very tubular roof prism, and we call the ones that have kind of an angle to them poro prisms. Poro prisms, I would say, are the first design of binocular, and the roof prisms are a more modern design. And so most bird watchers that are serious about bird watching have roof prism binoculars at this point in time. I've had bird watchers also tell me, I want binoculars that are going to be the highest magnification so that way I can see birds that are far away. And that is true. With the strong binoculars, you can see birds far away. They all have numbers. So let's talk a little bit about those numbers for a moment. The pair of binoculars I have, which are the ones on the center, are 8x30s. The first number is the magnification. So when you put those binoculars up, that image is appearing 8 times closer. 30 is the size in millimeters of the objective lens. It's how big that outer lens is. Here's how that plays a role. The smaller the objective lens, the lighter the binoculars. The larger the objective lens, the heavier they are, but the more light they let in. So these poro prism binoculars on the right are 10x40s. So they have greater magnification and they let more light in. What I like to tell folks is there's no one right pair of binoculars. What I do recommend, though, for binoculars is getting something that is somewhere in the range of 8 to 10 times magnification. You really don't want to go more than 10. And the reason for that is when you put those binoculars up to your face, you're shrinking your field of view because you're blowing it up, right? And if you're looking for these tiny little birds like chickadees or wood warblers or sparrows up in a tree, and you have 12, 14, 16 time magnification binoculars, it's going to be really tough to find those tiny little birds. So what I recommend is getting a nice pair of binoculars that are between 8 and 10 times magnification. And if you want to go out to the coast and look at sea ducks in the winter or want to look at shorebirds in the mudflats, then you can get yourself an accompanying field scope. And these telescopes are designed for bird watching, and they can be really great additions. On this screen here, yeah, you're probably looking at about $5,000 in expense. So no, not everyone can pay that or want to pay that. But perhaps if you're serious about this activity, you can accumulate some of these tools over time. It's also important to make sure that you have a means by which you can identify birds. And so there's a variety of field guides that you can use. These are ones that I have on my bookshelf. Some field guides are to all of North America, and some field guides are to specific parts of the country. You can see here the Sibley guide has birds in Western North America. So if I'm leading a trip out in Arizona, I grab my book with the lazuli bunting on it. If I'm leading a trip here in Eastern United States, I grab my book that has the rose-breasted grosbeak on it. If I want a larger guide that has all of the birds on it, then maybe you grab your Petersons or your Kaufman or your National Geographic. There's a lot of different guides and they all have great value. There's also a bunch of bird apps that you can use. Applications can be really helpful. Some are free, some are a one-time purchase, and others you need to pay an annual subscription for. So take a look at some bird apps. The Sibley app is fantastic. The iBird Pro app is excellent as well. We also have a free app by Cornell called Merlin. Perhaps some of you already use Merlin. It has a wonderful tool where it hears bird song, it writes out a sonograph, and it helps you identify birds by their song. It is amazing, and it's not 100%. So what I like to teach is try to learn the bird songs yourself, listen and go, I think I'm hearing an X, Y, and Z, and then you can turn Merlin on, and it can help you establish or reinforce what you're actually hearing. Another tool that's really powerful is something called eBird. And if you haven't heard of eBird or used eBird, I cannot recommend this highly enough. Not only is it really beneficial to the bird watcher. But when you put observations into eBird, you're putting information into the largest community science-based project on Earth. All of the observations people are making into eBird are helping scientists understanding bird distribution, bird abundance, how are birds reacting to climate change. All of those pieces are really important. And so I definitely recommend that you look into eBird if you don't already have an eBird account. What are some next steps? Well, there are lots of bird watching communities that you can get involved in, right? You can bird on your own. You can bird with your partner, right? You can bird with your dog, however it works for you. But if you're looking for some support and you're looking for more knowledgeable people to go out with, there are a number of bird clubs in Massachusetts that you can look into. There are classes that you can find for like organizations such as Mass Audubon offer. Take a look in our program catalog online, and you can see that there are naturalists all over the state that have opportunities for you to join us to do bird watching. You can go to your local store, your Wild Birds Unlimited, right? Bird watching general store. These knowledgeable people not only can help you out in learning more about birds, but they can also steer you towards products that will bring more birds to your yard. Bird watching is not just go out and do it willy-nilly, however you want to do it. The American Birding Association has something we call the Birding Code of Ethics. This is really important. And the reason why I think it's important is if we are going to long-term enjoy these wonderful organisms, and we want the next generations to enjoy these wonderful organisms, we need to make sure that the welfare of the birds and the environments that they're in come first. And so here are 4 simple rules that if you abide by when you go out bird watching, not only can you enjoy the birds, but you're also helping to ensure the health and safety of the birds. Promote the welfare of birds and their environment. Respect laws and rights of others. Never trespass on private property to see a bird. Ensure that feeders, nest structures, and other artificial bird environments are safe and clean. Things like your bird feeders or your bird boxes. Group birding, whether organized or impromptu, requires special care. See number 1. One of the things that I do right now, because it's spring and it's breeding season, is I never play, or very rarely play, recordings of birds. Birds sing to establish territories and attract mates. And if we go out and we use recordings that we have on our applications, we may harass a bird off its territory. And so it's really important that recordings are used at a minimum or used for research. All right, here's our last slide, everyone, and then we'll have about 10 minutes or so to answer questions. Since the 1970s to today, it is estimated, based on real scientific information, that the birds that come into North America each year have been reduced by approximately 3 billion individuals. That's right, billion with a B. Birds have a lot that they're dealing with in order to survive. And it can be pretty daunting. You can say to yourself, I don't know what to do. How can I help birds? I'm one person. How can I possibly steward these fantastic animals? And I'm here to tell you that here are 7 simple things that if we all did, we would help bird populations in our communities. Number 1 is make windows safer. If you have birds that are flying into your windows, please address that. There are fantastic commercial products that you can put on your windows that help prevent window strikes. When you have a bird flying into your window, it's usually because that window is reflecting the plants in your yard and they think they're flying into a shrub for safety. And then they hit that window and then they're done for. Cats are fantastic pets. Perhaps some of you have cats. I love cats as well. We know that cats that are kept inside not only live longer, healthier lives themselves, but they also don't negatively impact our wildlife, like birds and small mammals. If you have a yard or community garden or a rooftop garden or something like that, you can plant native plants. Birds this time of year need insects to feed themselves and feed young. And the less monoculture lawns we have and the more native perennial gardens we have, the better off birds will be. If you do that and you do gardening in your yard, please avoid pesticides. There are lots of products that we might use and don't even realize the negative impacts that they're having. If you do go to a garden center and you do want to buy some new perennials, ask the folks there, are these treated with neonicotinoids or neonics, which is a systemic pesticide that goes throughout the plant, including the flowers and the fruits or seeds. Try to plant organic. Number 5 is the one I get questions about all the time. Drink coffee that's good for the birds. I'll come back to that. We'll put a pin in that one. Protect our planet from plastic. We talked about birds primarily that you find on land. There are lots of birds that use wetland and marine environments, and a lot of plastics through wastewater end up in the ocean. So try not to use plastic if possible. And the 7th one I find to be the most fun. Watch birds and share what you see. If you have an enthusiasm for birds, share that enthusiasm with the people in your house, with your neighbors, with people on social media, right? More people who care about birds, the better we'll be at protecting them long term. Now, about this bird-friendly coffee, this is what this is all about. Lots of people, Americans, drink coffee. I'm included, right? Now, where does coffee usually grow? It's grown on coffee plantations in Central and South America primarily, right? Down in Colombia, perhaps. Well, a lot of the coffee that we drink and consume in America are coffee beans that are planted on coffee plantations that are monocultures. In other words, all of the forests, the rainforest has been cut down and it's just coffee plants that are grown there. Well, guess what? That Baltimore Oriole that has returned to your yard, or that scarlet tanager, or all those various wood warblers that are here in Massachusetts or northern New England breeding, in September and October, they leave us. They go back south to their wintering grounds. And guess where about 40% of our birds winter? Central and South America. So if we're buying coffee from monocultures that's destroying bird habitat, we're not helping bird life cycles. And so what you can do is you can purchase coffee that is shade grown, organic, and fair trade. And there are some products that have a Smithsonian bird-friendly seal. And if you're buying these coffees through your power of purchase, you're helping to save bird populations at a global level. We can all do something, folks. So that's an overview of information that I put together today to share with you about why and how birding and bird watching has come to be, how you can maybe take some of these tools and enjoy this activity more and share with others. It is a fantastic activity. As someone who's been at Mass Audubon for almost 25 years, when I came in, birding was a part of my job. And 25 years later, if I have a free morning, it's now an enjoyable recreational activity for me. This wonderful thing can consume your life in such a positive way. And so I hope this has inspired you to get out and do more birding this spring. So with that, Robert, I'm happy to stick around a little bit and we can tackle some questions.
Yeah, so folks, let's give Scott a big virtual round of applause for a great presentation. And yes, let's take some questions. If you have questions, please try to get them into the Q&A box. And if you have comments, please try to get those into the chat box, and I will read them both. Sarah says, I'm a tea drinker. Is there an impact on birds of tea growing?
I have not come across that before. I'm not aware of there being a correlation between tea growing and bird conservation, but that's something that we could look up and see if there's a connection there or not, but I'm not aware.
Eileen asks, what are the brand names of the kinds of coffee I should buy?
There are a number of brands. Some that come to mind are Birds and Beans is a good one. That is one that's Smithsonian certified. The tricky part is that not all bird-friendly coffee has the Smithsonian seal of approval. And so what I would do is just spend some time the next time you're on your phone or on your computer, maybe after this presentation, and you can look up what are bird-friendly coffees. And the general rule of thumb that I'm aware of is that if they meet these three criteria, if they're shade grown, right, because they're under the canopy of the rainforest, if they're organic because they're not using pesticides, and they're fair trade, those three pieces usually conclude that you're buying coffee that is grown in an area that's conducive to birds and wintering birds that leave us for the winter. So, but there's lots of information online that you can look up.
Christine thanks you for a great presentation. Amy says you were a wonderful speaker who had a wonderful and interesting presentation. And Scott, I think your presentation was so thorough that you've answered everyone's questions, because I don't see any I don't see any additional questions. And as we come up on, speak of the devil, let me see what we have here. Okay, I take that back. Let's go with at least two more questions.
Okay.
An anonymous attendee says, several times when walking, I have had a bird flying towards my head. What does this mean, and what can I do when this happens?
My assumption is that you may be walking in an area where there is a bird that is actively nesting, and the bird that is flying your way might think that here you are, you have binocular vision, you look like a predator. Maybe this is a bird that's trying to dissuade you from being in the area of where their nest is. The good news about nesting birds is from egg laying to young fledging, it's a pretty quick time frame, especially for little songbirds. And so if you can avoid the area, say for 6 weeks or so, then it shouldn't be a problem. Very rarely do birds come in contact with people. You know, birds will kind of threaten and posture, but they don't want to harm themselves. And so this bird may be just giving you a little buzz by letting you know that they have a family in the area.
Yeah. Louise says, where do songbirds hang out in rainy and stormy weather? They seem to totally disappear.
These animals are really well in tune to their environments. A lot of them will find places in evergreen trees. They will use cavities that are made by woodpeckers or other rodents, you know, in holes in trees. They may use man-made structures under decks, under the eaves of houses or sheds or things like that. Remember, though, that these animals have a wonderful exterior of keratin that we call feathers. And these feathers are wonderfully well adapted to keeping these animals warm and dry. And so even if these birds are on a branch exposed to the elements, chances are pretty good that they're going to be able to survive that inclement weather. The one piece that can be harmful to these birds during poor weather is if you're a bird that needs to eat bugs, say you're a tree swallow, and you have a long cold stretch with yucky weather, they may not be able to find the sufficient amount of food in order to be able to keep their furnace going. So I don't think the risk is that the weather, you know, is going to be harmful to the bird. The risk is that if the weather doesn't allow them to be able to effectively find food, then that could be a risk to the bird.
Frank says, thanks again. Bravo. Great presentation. All right, so folks, let's give Scott one more big last virtual round of applause. For those watching live, look for an email from me later today with a link to the recording, as well as information about some other upcoming virtual programs that might be of interest. And when you do exit the Zoom, please take 60 seconds and fill out that feedback survey. Scott, any last words for the audience? Any parting words?
Please, if you have an interest, visit one of our wildlife sanctuaries this spring, whether it's taking a walk or taking a program. We have lots of opportunities happening. I'm up here on the North Shore in the Newburyport, Topsfield area. And not only do we have a number of programs for adults, which are registration programs for fees, we also have a number of free programs as well, which are supported by local cultural councils. And so please look us up, and maybe I'll see you for a walk at some point this month.
All right. Thank you so much, Scott. Thank you all for joining. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day, has a great weekend. Bye-bye.